that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
The journey of the human race continues into completely uncharted territory. Whatever the current versions of the engineered COVID-19 pathogen do or don't do, those in power can, at any point of their choosing, release much more virulent strains of this virus or others. Is the pandemic, or an escalated version of it, the most dire and immediate threat we collectively face? No. Is the coming pharmaceutical industrial complex vaccine concoction likely an even greater threat? We'll soon enough find out the answer to that question. But there are, in fact, far greater existential challenges looming over us all. What are they? Stay tuned. The commercial-free Global Alert News Hour starts now. First, in last week's broadcast, this headline was covered. Quote, Trump mobilizing U.S. military internally in the U.S. to, quote, distribute vaccinations. Again, let's ask this question. Is our government planning to force vaccinate the population? For an answer, listen very carefully to the following audio statement from President Trump's confidant and attorney, Alan Dershowitz, who, for the record, also represented O.J. Simpson and Jeffrey Epstein. Again, listen carefully to the following statement from Trump attorney, Alan Dershowitz.
Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm if the vaccination is designed to prevent the spreading disease. But you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that.
Let me repeat what Dershowitz just said. Quote, you have no constitutional right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. You have no right, he repeats, to refuse to be vaccinated. Listen one more time.
You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm if the vaccination is designed to prevent the spreading disease. But you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that.
Question. Isn't this shocking statement from the president's attorney, Alan Dershowitz, a crystal clear definition of, quote, mandatory vaccinations, carried out by those with agendas that are clearly not about protecting the health of the population? What words did President Trump use to describe his attorney, Alan Dershowitz? Trump called him, quote, brilliant and highly respected. I wonder what words O.J. Simpson and Jeffrey Epstein used to compliment Dershowitz when he represented them. When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross. How profound that quote is from Sinclair Lewis. Question. Have the criminally insane and morally bankrupt always been present in human societies and civilizations? Consider this 2,000-year-old quote from the philosopher Cicero. He said, quote, a nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and he carries his banners openly. But the traitor moves among those within the gate freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the galleys, heard in the very hall of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor, He speaks in the accents familiar to his victims. He wears their face and their garment, and he appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown to undermine the pillars of a city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to be feared. Where will the engineered COVID-19 scenario go from here? What is scheduled for us all? From taskandpurpose.com, leaked Pentagon memo warns of, quote, real possibility of COVID-19 resurgence. Vaccine not coming until summer 2021. From that report, the Defense Department should prepare to operate in a, quote, globally persistent novel coronavirus environment without an effective vaccine until, quote, at least summer of 2021, according to a draft Pentagon memo obtained by Task and Purpose. We're all told that we need to adjust to social distancing, perhaps forever, that we're to sterilize or quarantine anything that anyone else might have touched, that we must wear masks anywhere and everywhere we go. Yet, are the highest-ranking members of our so-called government doing what they are ordering the rest of us to do? Further, we're expected to submit to having a, quote, toxic brew of who knows what injected into our bodies, made by manufacturers that are owned and controlled by those that state publicly they want to reduce global populations. On that note, from bigleaguepolitics.com and other sources, Bill Gates says that 700,000 could suffer side effects from his vaccine. In a recent interview on CNBC, renowned tech tycoon Bill Gates suggested that 700,000 could potentially suffer from side effects from a new vaccine to tackle the Wuhan virus. Again, even in that statement, the propaganda is woven in by labeling it the Wuhan virus, when peer-reviewed science studies have already proven that labs in the U.S., like Fort Detrick and other U.S. biolabs, were in fact directly involved with the research and the engineering that installed the gain of function characteristic into this pathogen. And yet they want the population to only hear Wuhan virus, China virus, so that our government's involvement, again with the National Institute of Health, contributing millions of dollars to this funding, which peer-reviewed science study has proven, and now mainstream media is doing their best never to mention again, so the population soon forgets about exactly where this virus came from. We must all learn to discern the headline reports from every source to put the pieces of the puzzle together properly so that the picture we create is accurate. Here are several highlights from this report that addresses the Bill Gates-sponsored vaccine and the damage we can expect from it. First, quote, the flu vaccine isn't that effective in elderly people. Let me stop there for a moment. Is that why we recently, until this engineered pandemic started, we had commercials airing on mainstream media constantly that there was a new super-powered flu vaccine 4 times stronger than other flu vaccines specifically designed for the elderly? We have peer-reviewed study now to prove that flu vaccines make the individual who received them 36% more likely to contract COVID and 51% more likely to get pneumonia. And when we have the elderly being given, or having recently been given, a flu vaccine that's 4 times more powerful still, is it any wonder at all that the elderly are the ones that are most consistently succumbing to what's being circulated now? Is there any doubt as to why? Connect the dots. Please connect the dots. Another point from this Gates article about what the coming vaccine, what we can expect it to do. 700,000 people will suffer, quote, COVID-19 side effects. Know this, vaccines do harm, period. Just because a diagnosis of specific damage isn't generated doesn't mean it didn't do harm. When you inject toxins into the body, harm is caused. The notion that the vaccine programs that we're exposed to are for the greater good is simply not supported by the data. Another highlight from this report. When the decision is made to, quote, give this vaccine to the entire world, governments will have to be involved because there will be, quote, risk and, quote, indemnification is needed. What does that mean? It means they will have to be indemnified, granted immunity from the harm and injury they cause, just like the entire vaccine industrial complex industry. Risk-free for any death and injury, all the death and injury they cause. What will it take for the population to actually face reality in this arena and so many others? And we are rapidly running out of time. Here's another Gates headline from CNBC. Gates stated this, quote, "I wish I had done more to call attention to the pandemic danger." Mr. Gates, you were a core component in the creation of the pandemic in the first place. Available data proves that fact beyond doubt, even to the point of you staging, quote, mock global coronavirus pandemic drills at the very time when the pandemic was already spreading and unfolding. This is not coincidence. The public is starting to see through this facade, and Gates, again, ultimately a puppet in the play as well. Those behind the curtain are the ones truly manipulating the levers of power. All of it needs to be exposed. From the New York Times and other sources, this new report of what is making us more susceptible to this engineered pathogen, and then let's connect this dot to the wider horizon. First, the headline, "In the shadows of America's smokestacks, virus is one more deadly risk." The report states, scientists are racing to understand if long-term exposure to air pollution plays a role in the coronavirus crisis. Do we really need a scientist to tell us that? The report states, particularly since minorities are disproportionately dying, researchers are finding reason to look closely. Preliminary research has shown patients in areas with historically heavy air pollution are more likely to die than patients elsewhere. First, is this not an obvious conclusion? Do we really need a team of scientists to tell us this? And next, is there really anywhere to hide on our planet at this point in time from highly toxic elements that are raining down from the sky? Climate engineering fallout, nanoparticulates consisting of heavy metals and polymers, which are among the smallest and most harmful of all to inhale, and from which there is no place to hide, are completely omitted from any official consideration in the COVID equation, or any official air quality testing for that matter, or disclosure. All of it omits the most lethal exposure to each of us from the climate engineering fallout. A reminder of this report, which was covered on this broadcast in July of last year, quote, "Billions of air pollution particles found in hearts of city dwellers." They didn't mention any testing done on people in rural areas that likely had just as high a count because they are breathing in the same particles from the same sources. But no study is done on them, so they can focus on this story in a way that does not make the overall picture clear. Again, on this headline, not just millions, but billions of atmospheric nanoparticles found in human hearts. Particles so small that they easily pass through the lung lining and go straight into the bloodstream. Again, numerous climate engineering patents call for the atmospheric spraying of highly toxic heavy metal and polymer nanoparticles. Question, is it possible biological elements are also attached to such particles? Let's take a moment to remember another report from less than a month ago, this one from USA Today, also previously covered on this broadcast. Here's the headline, quote, "How far does coronavirus travel in the air? Question mark. Report further states, the headline further states, preliminary study finds virus on tiny particles of air pollution. Lastly, let's again consider this statement from former U.S. government DoD scientist Dr. Ken Caldera. Again, for the record, Dr. Caldera is now the world's second most recognized geoengineering scientist. And let's definitely remember this. On the Bill Gates website, Gates notes, Bill Gates called Caldera, quote, "my most amazing teacher," end quote. Very definite relationship between these two individuals. This is what Mr. Caldera said, again, for the record.
I used to work in Lawrence Livermore National Lab, where we all sat around the room and thought about how do we manipulate geophysical systems to use it as a weapon. The meeting was about weaponizing geophysical interventions. That means, could you somehow interfere in Earth's functioning in a way that you could use it as a military weapon? Could you change climate? What could you do in terms of manipulating the sort of Earth's physical systems as a weapon?
Idea.
Well, some of the ideas were okay, maybe we could blow up hydrogen bombs, underwater, offshore, and make a tidal wave that would go over a city. And the result was, well, isn't it easier just to drop the hydrogen bombs on the city? Now you could imagine, though, say putting pathogens in a cloud, let the cloud go over somewhere, then would rain down on your enemy and create, do chemical or germ warfare in this kind of way.
So, Dr. Ken Caldera, former U.S. Department of Defense scientist, close associate of Bill Gates calling Dr. Caldera, quote, his most amazing teacher, did this kind of work for the U.S. government. And Caldera calls, quote, his enemy the target of such experimentation to seed the clouds with pathogens. Mr. Caldera, is the U.S. population now the enemy of the U.S. government, or those who control the U.S. government, I should say? And the answer is clearly yes. The U.S. population, again, the greatest potential counterbalancing force to the insanity that's unfolding on our planet. If that population would wake up, get past ideology, bias, preconception, and face the full fury of the truth that is bearing down on us all. And here is that truth. The U.S. population is not just expendable to those in power, those who control the U.S. government, but a rapidly increasing liability. Again, backtrack to 2012. When U.S. agencies like the Department of Homeland Security purchased 2.4 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point ammunition. Who do we think that was for? When the 2010 census GPSed every single one of our doorsteps, what do we think that was for? Because the census office wouldn't tell us. I tried to reach them repeatedly with no success. No disclosure on that. So is the ammunition and our exact locations the fallback if the other assaults against us aren't completely successful, i.e. engineered pathogens? These dots are not hard to connect. The planet cannot support the current paradigm any longer. Those in power know it. They are more desperate than ever. This is what Gngwash.org has warned about on the record. For the entire span of our existence, over 10 years, we have tried desperately to sound the alarm that this was coming, and now it's here, and the storm has just begun. For those who think that it's about to pass, think again. It is just beginning. Question, is there anywhere to hide? Answer, no. When you look up at the sky and you see the lingering, spreading atmospheric filth that's being dispersed from geoengineering, aka climate engineering jet aircraft, often enough filth to completely blot out the sky, sometimes to the point that the actual jet dispersions can barely, if at all, be seen, weaving this climate engineering solar radiation management web of toxic atmospheric particulates and, again, filth. Never forget that every single particle of these atmospheric toxins eventually and quite rapidly settles down to the surface where we all get to inhale it. Again, go out on a clear night after heavy aerosol operations with hazy skies. Because of that, shine the brightest light you can find straight into the sky and you'll be shocked at what's raining down. And it is exponentially worse than the days when no aerosol operations are present. And we know from lab testing what these particulates are. It's not just some sort of benign material, it's heavy metals and polymers, surfactants, all elements related to climate engineering. So, and this is not even to take into account the other forms of pollution from anthropogenic activity, which the atmosphere is also full of as well, all of it compounding. And now we know, making us all much more susceptible to contraction of elements like COVID-19 because of the inflammatory effect on our respiratory systems. Is it any wonder why every other commercial is COPD this, asthma that, allergy, on and on and on? Every other commercial, it doesn't matter what time of year it is. Why can't more people connect the dots on what's really going on? Climate engineering, aka weather warfare operations, are also a form of biological warfare, contaminating the entire biosphere, the entire breathable air column, thus rapidly eroding human health, respiratory function, and thus making us all susceptible to every form of pathogen, including the current pandemic. So why isn't more information readily available to address such an ominous and unescapable threat? First, there's the illegal federal gag order on all National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and all National Weather Service employees, i.e. the weathermen. Consider that. And there's this, a reminder, Google's total censorship of the largest geoengineering website and data repository in the world, geoengineeringwatch.org, which Google completely deleted from a search of the geoengineering term. So with over 35 million visitors and counting, and with well over 2,000 data reports on geoengineeringwatch.org, we went from the top of the first page of the Google search of the term geoengineering, which our rankings put us at the top, to being completely deleted from Google's 20 pages under the subject of the heading geoengineering. Google, of course, has long been the power structure's gatekeeper to information that is available to the population. But how does Google fit into the current scenario that most people have on their mind? Consider this headline from late last year, covered at geoengineeringwatch.org at the time. From many sources, Google joins the pharmaceutical industry. From this report, Google's expanding ties to Big Pharma have been exposed with the disclosure of its new pharmaceutical division, which just happens to be led by the former head of GlaxoSmithKline's global vaccine business. Remember that point. And now consider this new report, also from numerous sources. White House to tap former GlaxoSmithKline executive to lead COVID vaccine effort. That's from, again, numerous sources. Now let's add this new headline report. President Trump's new COVID-19 vaccine czar holds 10 million in vaccine company stock options. Moncef Slaoui, President Trump's new vaccine czar, now the head of the so-called Operation Warp Speed. What a ridiculous title using a Star Trek term. That's the insane asylum we live in. The report continues. This individual, again, Slaoui, President Trump's appointment, just leapt from the board of directors of vaccine manufacturer Moderna to the U.S. government vaccine czar position. And no surprise, again, Slaoui owns 155,000 Moderna stock options totaling more than $10 million. Only last month, Moderna had already received nearly $500 million of U.S. government funds. The so-called swamp is not being drained. It continues to be filled with the most qualified criminals money can buy. Let's double back to more breaking reports on the engineered COVID scenario that's being used to lock down societies all over the globe as climate and biosphere collapse accelerates. From the Palm Beach Post, quote, something we've never seen before. Scientists still trying to understand baffling, unpredictable coronavirus. Let's stop and consider for a moment that the halls of academia are being paid by the power structure to not understand, or at least not to admit to the peer-reviewed proven fact that CV-19 came from a lab, not from nature. So this question, why would anyone rationally believe that the, quote, unpredictable coronavirus that has scientists, quote, baffled is going to be cured by magic vaccine? A magic vaccine that, coincidentally, will also profit members of the criminal cabal that's masquerading as the U.S. government, and always has. Last one to draw a line in the sand with the power structure, again, was Kennedy. He was killed shortly after. No one has since. All puppets in the play, doesn't matter what political stripe they wear, does not matter. So again, should we be reassured that Mr. Gates tells us that only about 700,000 will be injured from the pharmaceutical industrial complex concoction that the power structure is clearly planning to force on us all? What are other potential COVID-19 related threats? About the COVID-19 testing that's being pushed by so many, let's take a moment to remember that multiple shipments of COVID-19 tests have been proven to be contaminated. Some shipments were actually contaminated with the COVID-19 pathogen itself. On May 8th, 2020, the Centers for Disease Control listed specific priorities for when testing should be done on the population. And here's the question we should ask ourselves. Will we have the right to refuse that test? Do we have that right? The U.S. Constitution says yes. The rule of law says yes. But now our government is trying to change the rules. The provision And this report states this: persons without symptoms who are prioritized by health departments or clinicians for any reason, including but not limited to public health monitoring, sentinel surveillance, or screening of asymptomatic individuals according to state and local plans. It means they can test anyone they want, anytime they want, or at least they're going to try to, regardless of anybody's justifiable concerns of the risks the test itself may pose to their health. A reminder of what I covered last week in regard to vaccinations. Again, this is very important because so many fall back on the polio false narrative as if that's proof that vaccines are some wonderful element for the greater good. Again, this recent headline: polio outbreaks in Africa caused by mutation of strain in vaccine. The report states more current polio cases have been caused by vaccines than the wildfires. And that's from the World Health Organization, by the way. Let's also take a moment to remember the Qatar incident. I've also covered before, but it's important to remember this: how America's first polio vaccine led to a growing vaccine crisis. In April 1955, more than 200,000 children in 5 western and midwestern USA states received a polio vaccine, which then caused 40,000 cases of polio. 40,000 cases. We, all of us, are swimming in a sea of lies propagated by a power structure that controls mainstream media and so many industries within our industrialized, militarized societies. They control the narrative. They literally control the public's perception of the truth. Indeed, in far too many cases, the public's very perception of reality. Consider this quote from Malcolm X. He said this: "The media is the most powerful entity on earth because they control the minds of the masses. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent." He went on to say this: "Newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing." And there is this quote to consider from Voltaire, who said this: "It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong." Too many have chosen to blindly presume industrialized, militarized civilization was permanent. Far too many still want to tell themselves that what's happening isn't really happening. And unfortunately, even those who are addressing the completely engineered COVID-19 global lockdown scenario are completely omitting the backdrop of the entire equation: the collapse of environments all over the globe, aquatic and terrestrial, the collapse of Earth's climate and life support systems, and the ongoing geoengineering jet aircraft aerosol spraying that is a core component to it all. The extraordinarily obvious climate engineering elephant in the sky and the massively powerful microwave transmissions that go with it. Transmissions that are utilized to manipulate the jet-sprayed aerosols, heavy metal and polymer nanoparticles, which are in and of themselves highly toxic. All of this continues to go completely unacknowledged, even by the majority who recognize the COVID-19 scenario as being an engineered lockdown assault against global populations. Last Thursday in the late afternoon, the spraying over Northern California was horrific. The skies looked like something from another planet. And all the while, residents went about their business in Redding, California, donning their power structure mandated masks, never even noticing the skies. It seems the sky could be lit on fire and almost none would take notice. What will the majority choose to do now that they are increasingly forced to face the fact that the COVID-19 pathogen was absolutely not a random act of nature, but an engineered assault against global populations that was designed for and is being utilized for facilitation of total lockdown and total control? Will any significant percentage of populations react rationally by fully investigating the truth, fully facing the truth, and then doing all they can to peacefully stand against the unfolding insanity with other awakened individuals who are doing the same? Or will the majority of the population continue to do what they have done so far, to blindly and unquestioningly carry out the dictates of a completely out of control power structure? Will they continue to have their opinions and perspectives fed to them from the power structure and mainstream media trough of total propaganda and programming? What will the majority do as their lives are forced into an Orwellian nightmare scenario? The truth on so many fronts has been systematically ignored. The truth about vaccine dangers have been ignored. The truth about 5G dangers, radio frequency microwave transmissions in general have been ignored. The truth about what really happened on 9/11, ignored. The truth about Saddam Hussein's non-existent weapons of mass destruction, ignored. That particular scenario being the fabricated premise for the empire's invasion of resource-rich Iraq. All of this ignored, so many other issues ignored. The Gulf of Tonkin for Vietnam, on and on and on the list goes. Just like the looting, plundering, pillaging, and polluting of countries all over the globe is being ignored. And on that final point, yes, countries all over the globe are absolutely each responsible for a share in the planetary decimation, with China, the US, and Russia at the top of the list. But who is the largest single source polluter on the entire planet? The US military. And please don't believe anything I've just stated. Find the courage and take the time to actually investigate every fact stated for yourself. The point I'm trying to make is this: the majority of populations, especially first world populations, even now, don't yet have any real understanding of what is unfolding in the world and why. But the worst truth is this: the majority would still rather cling to ideology, preconception, and program bias, rather than facing dire but necessary to know truths. With that unfortunate fact in mind, consider the extensive psychological studies that confirm what should be an obvious and easily recognized conclusion, that, quote, the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire or unpleasant that truth is. We, all of us, are rapidly running out of time. If the human race remains on the current course, we will soon reach the end of our collective journey, and none will come after. Consider this quote by Civil War General Carl Schurz. He said this: "We have come to a point where it is loyalty to resist and treason to submit." Martin Luther King stated, "There comes a point when silence is betrayal." We are all caught in a planetary asylum, with too many worshiping the god of technology and not questioning the criminal insanity of those in power. Collectively, the human race has decimated this once thriving planet in the geologic blink of an eye. And now, as Earth's life support systems unravel at blinding speed, global power structures are doing all they can to lock down, control, and accelerate the demise of populations that, again, with each passing day, are an ever greater liability to them. The engineered COVID-19 pandemic is only one of their tools. The storm is only beginning. Stay tuned for more Frontline reports. First, to each and every individual that's doing their best to stay informed, to wake others, and to help turn the tide, thank you, more than I can ever express. It is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference at this late hour. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode number 250, May 23rd, 2020. In this broadcast, news that covers the issues we must face if we're to have any chance of changing course. This commercial-free Frontline News broadcast is brought to you by Gngwash.org and paid for by Gngwash.org. This news hour is broadcast throughout Northern California, 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM, Saturday mornings from 6 to 7, Sunday mornings, same time slot, repeat broadcast. Also, this broadcast is aired on the East Coast, Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time by the PRN Radio Network. Recordings of this broadcast can be found at geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. The latest geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials can be ordered from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. Moving on, more headlines. I'm not going to give sources on all these. They're easily searched from the headline itself. I want to cover as much ground as I can because I really don't have enough to cover what's unfolding on the wider horizon in this 1 hour broadcast. This is just a sampling of Frontline headlines. There are many more. There is so much unfolding. Economic impacts. New car registrations in Europe fall 76% in April as coronavirus lockdowns hit sales. Another headline, long-lasting global recession likely due to COVID-19. It's not a recession. It is the end of what was. Please understand that. We are through the guardrail. There is no going back. Now it's a question of what can we yet salvage. Another headline, America's zombie companies are multiplying and fueling new risks. Another headline, quote, all my dreams are shattered, end quote. Coronavirus crushes Asia's garment industry. Another headline, Australia faces, quote, unprecedented economic hit from coronavirus. Another headline, coronavirus rental hardship, quote, kicked down the road to spring of, quote, carnage. Another headline, Russian economy shrank by a quarter in April. Early data shows. Another headline, Canadian home sales see worst April since 1984. Montreal and Toronto lead lower. Another headline, coronavirus in Spain. Social unrest feared as draconian lockdown cripples economy. Another headline, protests over lockdown and food shortages. Remember that part, because that's coming for us all. Another headline, Lebanese are despairing over their next meal as the economic crisis worsens. Another headline, the Navy just sent a submarine force into the Western Pacific in a message to China. Again, global conflict, another tool of the power structure. But make no mistake, all the major powers are colluding and cooperating behind the scenes on many fronts, including climate engineering, including the COVID pathogen, and none of them fully disclosing the truth about any of it. There's clearly a coordinated effort by the major powers and the media they control to blame nature for what has unfolded, when again, there's a mountain of data to prove otherwise. Power structure controlled academicians and mainstream media sources, again, trying to convince populations that COVID-19 was a random act of nature in spite of peer-reviewed studies and research reports proving COVID-19 came from labs that were given millions in funding from the National Institute of Health, with Dr. Anthony Fauci in a directing position. About blaming nature and biosphere collapse. Which are the true bottom line? Climate and biosphere collapse, Earth's life support systems collapsing, are the factor on the wider horizon that is forcing the power structure desperation that has now implemented the engineered COVID-19 scenario. All of these dots are connected. But about blaming nature, this new headline from ScienceAlert.com, quote, the Amazon could easily be the next source of coronavirus, scientist warns. Researchers say that the urbanization of once wild areas contributes to the emergence of zoonotic diseases, those that pass from animals to humans. Yes, that's what academia is doing. Blame the jungles, blame the melting glaciers, but certainly don't point any fingers at the hundreds of biolabs around the globe that peer-reviewed science study makes clear engineered the COVID-19, quote, gain of function characteristic that facilitated the jump to humans, in addition to the HIV DNA strands and SARS DNA strands that were also engineered into this pathogen, and likely numerous other versions of it that the power structure will continue to let loose on still willfully in denial populations. So what is the bottom line to the equation we face, to the horizon we face? Biosphere collapse. When the planet's life-sustaining climate and environments unravel, the Anthropocene, i.e. the age of man, the Anthropocene epoch, which we are in now, will be over. Man's attempt to play God with the weather has only further accelerated the entire process, in addition to contaminating every breath we take. Again, biosphere collapse is the bottom line, and collapse is now. From New York Magazine, NewYorkMag.com, NYMag.com, Life After Warming, new report states this: welcome to the end of, quote, the human climate niche. The report states today, at just 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming, the planet is already hotter than it has ever been in the entire history of human civilization, which means everything we have ever known as a species is the result of climate conditions that we have already left behind. In essence, we are on a new planet with a new climate. And with a new climate, we have to sort out what of the civilizations we've brought with us can survive these new conditions and what cannot. The report states or asks, how different will things get? The last time there was as much carbon in the atmosphere as there is today, there were palm trees in the Arctic. First, a correction for the record on this report I just covered, the excerpt I just covered. The actual extent of warming, which is being lied about by all official sources, is likely over 3.5 degrees C already. It's about 6+ degrees Fahrenheit and climbing by the day. And this means that the planet is already hotter than at any point during the entire span of human existence on the planet, not just civilization's existence. One could compare the human race and the experiment of industrialized, militarized society to a group of travelers that sets out on a journey across an endless and inhospitable desert. In a motorhome with a full tank of gas and a refrigerator full of food, the travelers convince themselves that the journey is sustainable. The vast majority, even now, have no idea how woefully wrong they were. The motorhome is now overheating, the air conditioner is breaking down, and the refrigerator shelves will soon be bare. And who's been driving the motorhome since the beginning? The criminally insane and the morally bankrupt. And now, the real party is about to start. The drivers of the ill-fated vehicle are more desperate than ever. They believe if they can rid themselves of the rest of the passengers, they can ensure their own survival, but they are wrong. Though the controllers have options at their disposal, such as engineered pathogens, false flag events like 9/11, and global conflict, when the ship, i.e. planet Earth's life support systems, fail, the passengers and the controllers will go down with the sinking ship. Many continue to deny that our common predicament could be so dire. Deniers often claim that, quote, they, i.e. those in power, those who control the flow of money and thus everything else, would never, quote, do this to themselves. For the record, they have already again and again done this to themselves, from the detonation of nuclear bombs, over 2,000 of them, which contaminated everything on the planet, to the building of nuclear power plants, all of which will eventually go into full meltdown, to the bombardment of the biosphere with RF microwave transmissions, to the climate engineering aerosol spraying, which is destroying the ozone layer, without which we all die. By the way, at the current rate of ozone layer disintegration, calculations indicate we have less than a decade until total collapse, game over. All of this is converging at once. And again, there are countless other forms of human decimation being inflicted on the planet and Earth's life support systems from industrialized, militarized societies. So, to summarize, for those who refuse to believe what is unfolding because they refuse to believe that those in power would, quote, do this to themselves, the destruction of Earth's life support systems was never a goal. Rather, it has always been a consequence of the unbridled and completely insane lust for total power and control. And never forget, the controllers could not have carried out their campaigns of planetary carnage without the active or passive support of the majority of populations, i.e. the passengers. That reality must change, or we have no chance. If the human race remains on the current course, no one gets out alive. And this will occur on a time frame that is unimaginably short. No habitat, no humans. Simple. How fast is the planet heating up? And no, this is not about Al Gore, the power structure puppet. It's about reality. The thermal energy buildup on Earth at this moment in time, statistically, mathematically, is equal to the thermal energy, i.e. the heat, contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs going off per second. That's about 400,000 per day. Much of that heat has gone into the oceans. Most of that heat has gone into the oceans, thus the collapse of aquatic ecosystems all over the globe. And now this heat is transferring more and more into the atmosphere. And again, I'm not asking anyone to believe anything that I cover in this broadcast. What I'm asking for is for you to investigate. The converging catastrophes we collectively face are complex and interconnected. Accurate conclusions cannot be arrived at unless or until the entire horizon we face is examined and investigated without bias, without preconception, or without viewing through a lens that has been colored with a lifetime of power structure propaganda. It's up to all of us to refine our ability to ferret out the truth from sources that make it their practice not to tell it. On that note, from the Washington Post, why some spots on the planet are heating up faster than others. And of course, the reasons given in these kinds of mainstream media reports are not the core causal factors. In regard to the radically worsening weather whiplash scenarios that are occurring all over the globe, climate engineering is the core causal factor in that equation. There's no question about that. It's not to say that there are not other elements in play, but there can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering issue. And there can be no legitimate discussion about climate engineering without first and foremost addressing the engineered cool-down events, chemical ice nucleation for weather modification, for which there are patents. We have an entire section on this. Please research that at Gngwash.org, the engineering winter section, the engineering drought section, the engineering wildfires section. Educate yourself so that you might have a clearer vision of the horizon and be able to better connect the pieces to the puzzle to form an accurate picture. We just had an engineered cool down in Northern California. We went from nearly 100 degrees down to 40s. And now we're going back up to the hundreds in only the course of a few days. This is not nature. This is climate engineering. And they are increasingly desperate. They are forcing the climate far past the breaking point. I'm not denying other human factors, other sources of anthropogenic damage to the planet, but climate engineering is the greatest single assault against Earth's life support systems and the web of life ever launched by the human race, and it is intricately connected with everything that is unfolding, including the engineered COVID-19 scenario. In regard to what's happening around the planet that we're not being told about, this headline: wildfires ravaged Siberia last year. This spring, the blazes are starting even bigger. Again, no habitat, no humans. The wildfire scenario most directly related to climate engineering, please review the engineering wildfires section at geongngwash.org. Not speaking about the sources of ignition. I want to clarify that. I'm speaking about the conditions that are being established that are allowing these blazes, that are facilitating these blazes. The source of ignition for any of these fires is a completely separate subject. Please keep that in mind. From that report, Moscow, spring wildfires across Siberia have Russian authorities on alert for a potentially devastating summer season. Some of the fires in eastern Russia have already dwarfed the infernos from this time last year, which ultimately burned through 7 million acres in total, more than the size of Maryland, and sent smoke drifting as far as the United States and Canada. And that's part of the issue, and that's part of the connection to climate engineering, is filling the atmosphere with smoke, loading the atmosphere with sun-blocking particulates, using the forest incinerations as a form of artificial volcano to provide temporary cooling in some regions. And yes, wildfires smoke does provide short-term temporary cooling at the cost of a far worse overall warming of the planet. Please understand the intricacies of the scenario. And in regard to all the related factors we face, so many still clinging to the solar minimum narrative, as if the planet is, the false narrative that the planet is somehow descending into a cooling period because of a lull in solar activity. And this narrative is patently false. Let's look at the math. Even a major solar minimum like the Maunder minimum only created about a 0.25% reduction in solar radiance. That's 1/400th. Against the backdrop of what human activity has done to the planet, it's virtually meaningless, has not had any appreciable effect on the radical climate collapse that's occurring on our planet right now, the runaway meltdown that's occurring. And again, for those that live in certain parts of the U.S. that have been kept cool by the climate engineers year in and year out, in fact, as I've stated many times, the eastern half of the North American continent being the most anomalously less warm place on the planet consistently for the last 6 years. If you live in that area, especially the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48, that's 1/200th of the Earth's surface area. That is not indicative of what's occurring on the entire planet, not at all. And that's one of the primary purposes of climate engineering, to confuse and divide the population on the true state and immediacy of planetary climate collapse until the last possible moment. Another headline from phys.org. The revolt of the plants. The Arctic melts when plants stop breathing. And plants and forests are reducing their respiration. That's why forests don't smell like forests anymore, because of the intense UV, because of the disruption of the hydrological cycle, because of the toxic elements falling in precipitation, which is affecting root systems. The forest flora is shutting its stomata. It's not respirating, it's not breathing, it's not uptaking carbon. And as this happens, dominoes begin to fall throughout the ecosystem. And each falling domino takes down even more, creating a massive exponential chain reaction until the planet's life support systems cease to function. More headlines. This report from gizmodo.com.au, quote, the Arctic is unraveling as a massive heat wave grips the region. From that report, freakishly warm air has billowed up from Siberia over the Arctic Ocean and parts of Greenland, against Siberia on flames, and the heat will only intensify in the coming days. The warmth is helping to spread widespread wildfires and to kickstart the ice melt season very early, both ominous signs of what summer could hold. Russia had its hottest winter ever recorded, driven largely by Siberian heat. That heat hasn't let up as the calendar turns to spring. In fact, it's intensified and spread across the Arctic. Last month, the hottest April on record for the globe, driven by high Arctic temperatures that averaged an astounding 9.4 degrees Celsius above normal. That's nearly 20 degrees above normal. on average over an extended period of time. As we lose the polar ice cap, the Arctic, the heating in the ocean goes exponential. That in turn thaws formerly frozen methane hydrate deposits on the seafloor. It's already happening. Massive methane blowouts are occurring on the seafloor. They're occurring throughout Siberia. Search Siberian methane craters. You will be shocked at the images you see online. Same thing happening on the seafloor on a much larger scale. Methane is thawing and literally exploding into the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of glass. We are on track right now for what is scientifically termed Venus syndrome. I've stated over and over in the Arctic alone to turn the planet into Venus many times over. If that gas escapes and enters the atmosphere, climate engineering in the attempt to hide what's unfolding, making it far worse, not better, the power structure attempting to hide all of it from the population, now engaged in the COVID-19 engineered scenario to lock down that population and distract them from anything on the wider horizon. More headlines. Siberian heat wave, May 2020. Temperature anomalies are forecast to be at the high end of the scale over Siberia on May 22nd, 2020, as much as 54 degrees above the 79 to 2000 average, which is already above the pre-industrial average. Nearly 60 degrees above normal. Do we see our media talking about that? Absolutely not. We only hear headlines of the cold, cold, cold in parts of the engineered winter U.S., where moisture has been repeatedly pumped in, chemically nucleated, sun's blotted out, the surface temperature is kept cool. As soon as that clears, weather whiplash scenarios occur, temperatures heat right back up, just like California is about to fry in record 100-plus degree heat. Weather whiplash, not nature. Climate engineering. COVID-19 scenario, not nature. Engineered pathogen origin, a lab created by a criminally insane power structure that's completely and totally out of control. More headlines on the unfolding biosphere collapse, which is the most immediate threat to our collective existence. Biosphere collapse is the bottom line. From commondreams.org, quote, a life of heat, quote, near unlivable for more than 3 billion people in just decades. False headline. It's here, now. We don't have decades. This is the kind of public pacification that occurs from even sources of, quote, alternative information. They are not telling us the truth. More headlines. Follow me through with this from phys.org and other sources. Climate change makes, quote, repeat Dust Bowl twice as likely. Again, in regard to the lack of precipitation, climate engineering, largest core factor. Search the engineering drought section at Gngwash.org. Another headline, climate change and the aridification of North America. Again, most directly linked to climate engineering operations. The climate engineers control the spigot. They control the flow of water. This is not my opinion. It's not theory. It's not conjecture. It's not hypothesis. It's science-proven fact. Please research the engineering drought section on the homepage of Gngwash.org. A few more headlines, almost out of time. From the Times of Israel, beaches packed despite virus regulations as Israel swelters under heat wave. Another headline, different source, Al Jazeera on this one. Crowds flock to the beach as heat wave hits Greece. Another headline, different sources from severeweather.eu. Turkey swings from extreme heat back to winter temperatures in 2 days. Cold blast across the eastern half of Europe. Weather whiplash directly related to climate engineering. Final headline report. Just how hot will it get this century? It's worse than we thought. It's unimaginably worse than anything we've been told, and it's here, it's now, it's not over the horizon, it's not down the road somewhere, and it's completely connected to the COVID-19 global lockdown scenario being carried out. The former reality that we've all known is no more. That fact must be accepted. Where do we go from here? The answers to that question rest on what we collectively choose to do or not to do in the time we have, in the window of opportunity that yet remains, in which we can still affect the equation. The first and most critical leap in the right direction we can collectively make is to fully awaken the majority of the population to what is unfolding and why. Reaching a critical mass is, in fact, the only way forward in this fight. If we can accomplish that, countless wheels in the battle will begin to turn the right direction on their own. This battle against the storm of insanity cannot be waged without an army of the awakened. Search the activist suggestions link on the homepage of Gngwash.org to learn why this is so, and more importantly, to learn how you can can make a difference, how you can make your voice heard in this all-important fight for the greater good. The sand in the hourglass is rapidly running out. We, each of us, all of us, must make every single day count. Only our collective efforts can yet make a difference at this late hour. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with Gngwash.org.